Okay, Katie, if you've finished slurping your tea, let's start this podcast. Hello, Europe, and hello, the rest of the world listening in, because let's be honest, Europe is never just about Europe. Welcome to the latest episode of The Europeans. I'm Dominic Kramer, speaking to you from a freezing cold Amsterdam. And down the line there with a cup of tea is Katie Lee in Paris. How are you, Katie?
I promised that was actually my last slurp. I'm good, thanks. Yeah, also very cold. But nice to have you back, Dominic. You were away singing last week in, I think, about 15 different operas.
Yeah.
Did you manage to not get confused between the many languages you had to sing in?
It is a bit confusing going from Russian to Dutch to English to Italian, honestly, but I'm surviving, and it's at least distracting me from, the horrors of the rest of the world.
What horrors? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, honestly, I've been burying my head in the sand a bit this week about the inauguration on the other side of the Atlantic. And I realized that's maybe a privileged thing to be able to do. But I also felt like watching those images of the Orange Man and his gang of oligarchs being broadcast all around the world. I felt like it wasn't so helpful for me to watch any of it or engage in it. So this is going to be an Orange Man free zone pretty much this week, I think, right?
Right. And just to clarify, is that the official term we're going to be using for the next 4 years, the Orange Man?
I still prefer he who must not be named, personally, but we can workshop it.
We'll experiment. Well, this week I hope we can offer a little bit of distraction by talking about not necessarily all light, flippant things, a mix as usual. But what have we actually got coming up on the show this week, Dominic?
Well, in our weekly interview slot, we try our best to cover as diverse a range of guests and topics as possible. We speak to chefs, to scientists, to DJs, and of course we sometimes speak to journalists. But this week, we thought it was high time that we spoke to a drag cow.
Yes, a drag cow.
Yes.
As in a drag queen that's a cow.
Exactly that. Our guest this week is Soya the Cow, the alter ego of the Swiss-based drag artist and activist Daniel Hellmann. We'll be speaking to Daniel later on in the show about a number of his projects, including a wedding where he married Ferruccio, an Italian bull.
As you do.
This is not one to miss, but first, of course, it's time for Good Week, Bad Week.
Good week, bad week.
Who's had a good week, Dominic?
Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Queen of Europe, as I think you like to somewhat ironically refer to her.
Half ironically.
She's getting good week this week because she is back to work after recovering from a severe bout of pneumonia.
Yeah, she was horribly sick, right?
Yeah, it seems to have been a really awful time for her. She was in hospital for over a week and cancelled all engagements for the first half of January. But we didn't quite know how awful it had been for her until after she was discharged from hospital due to a rather odd choice from her press team to keep it a secret that she was in hospital. Her press chief, Paolo Pino, actually was directly asked by a journalist if she was in hospital whilst she was in hospital and just responded by saying there was no update. Eventually, her team did admit that she'd been in hospital, but this bout of pneumonia has raised a lot of questions about transparency in von der Leyen's team and about her instinct to centralize power and not let go of it.
Yeah, this doesn't feel like the first time von der Leyen and her team have come under attack for a lack of transparency.
No, indeed. I mean, there are various things that particularly journalists complain about, like the fact that she doesn't give many interviews and gives very short press conferences. But in fact, the outgoing head of the EU's watchdog organisation, the EU's ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly, she was interviewed on Politico's podcast at the end of last year, and she painted quite a grim picture of an untransparent culture at the top of the EU Commission. So no, this period of pneumonia is not the first time that Ursula has been accused of not being totally open. And of course, I wish for people to be able to retain privacy around their health. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if you're president of the European Commission, I would argue that you have a responsibility to be honest about the situation and about your capacities and to delegate some of your powers whilst you are sick.
So am I to understand correctly that the European Commission was basically without a leader for a little while? Because that seems a bit alarming.
Well, her team claim that Ursula von der Leyen was in touch with her team daily, even while she was in hospital.
Classic Ursula. Doesn't know when to just get some rest.
Yeah, so they deny that. But it does seem like there was at least a bit of a power vacuum for a while. I mean, one of the weekly meetings of all the European commissioners was cancelled because von der Leyen wasn't well enough. And then actually for last week's meeting, she did let it go ahead, but wasn't well enough to be herself. So she finally handed over the reins to chair that meeting to one of her executive vice presidents, Teresa Ribera from Spain. But many EU observers I've read find it extraordinary that she didn't hand over the reins sooner to Ribera. In fact, some EU observers say that she was obliged to hand over powers to Ribera, although I've read different opinions on that, some saying that there's nothing actually set in stone about what the Commission President has to hand over and what she's allowed to keep hold of. Yeah, but the whole time she was in hospital, she remained the person in charge. And obviously, there's nothing she can do about getting very sick. And I'm pleased she's better. That's why she's getting Good Week this week. But it really wasn't an ideal time for the EU to be without strong leadership.
There is some stuff going on right now.
Right. I mean, just to name a few things, this was when he, who must not be named, was suddenly talking about taking over Greenland, and Elon Musk was interfering in various aspects of some quite important European elections. A lot has been happening, and the EU hasn't been incredibly quick or strong in its response to these alarming geopolitical events. Now, I've actually read our friend of the pod, Alberto Alemano, saying that he doesn't think it's because she was sick that the response wasn't so strong from the European Commission, that they've also made this choice to delegate some of these issues to the European leaders.
Is that a choice, or is that just because they're not necessarily that good at coming up with joint positions on things?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. Anyway, lots of people are quite angry with Ursula von der Leyen and the way she dealt with this. There was a German MEP quoted in Politico last week saying that even Buckingham Palace is transparent about hospitalization these days. He said, "Why do you have executive vice presidents if you don't trust them to take over usual business in times like this, in the first week of January, when many people are still on holiday?" So, yeah, it's making people mad.
I know you said this was a good week. So this is clearly a sort of caveated good week for Ursula von der Leyen.
Yeah, a Katie Lee classic.
You know I love him. I feel like one of the big caveats in the good week is the fact that that big event in Washington, D.C. on January 20th that you don't want to talk about very much, she wasn't actually invited to that, was she?
Yeah, indeed. Ursula von der Leyen was not invited to Trump's inauguration, and I don't really want to talk about it much more, but perhaps it's not so surprising that she wasn't invited. I think typically there aren't that many world leaders that attend the inauguration of a US president. And the thing that was surprising this time was that Trump went out of his way and invited so many of the most, let's say, repulsive figures on the world political scene. A rather strange gang of people, including Giorgia Meloni, Javier Milei, and Benjamin Netanyahu.
Xi Jinping?
Ooh, am I describing them all as repulsive? I don't know. I take that back.
Send your complaints to hello@europeanspodcast.com.
Anyway, she didn't go there, but she did turn up at a summit for leaders of the European political party grouping, which she is a member of, the so-called European People's Party.
Oh, those guys.
That was her first public appearance, and she chatted there with other Christian Democrats and liberal conservatives about European security, migration, and of course, how Europe should be responding to the man who just took power in the States. And of course, she turned up then a few days later in Davos. In fact, we're recording on Tuesday, and I think she gave a speech this afternoon, but I haven't managed to watch it yet. I think she managed also not to mention his name in the whole of the speech, but it was obviously all kind of discussing how to respond to him.
I wonder if she did a better job of not referring to him than we've done so far.
I don't think she went with the orange man as the name, or he who must not be named.
Maybe she should have done.
Oh, well. But yeah, I'm giving von der Leyen a good week simply for being well enough to do her job again. Not a good week for how she is doing her job or for how her illness was managed by her team.
you know what, having had pneumonia last year, and it really didn't feel like a normal cold at all. It was horrendous. And this wasn't even a bad enough case to be hospitalized. I really do wish her the best. So I'm very glad to hear that she's well enough to be back at work.
Me too. Who's had a bad week, Katie?
I would say it has been a pretty bad week for one of Croatia's deputy prime ministers, Josip Dabro. He has had to resign over a video of him shooting a gun out of a car window, kind of randomly into the darkness while laughing.
That is so mad. Why did he do that? Why was someone filming it? Yeah, I have a lot of questions.
Well, poor Josip says that he has been stabbed in the back. This was a fun video that he apparently filmed with a couple of mates a few years ago. He said they were on the way back from some kind of family celebration. He thinks maybe the birth of his nephew. His memory is foggy. At any rate, he and his friends were chilling out in the car, and because they were in a fun and giggly mood, he thought he would fire at random out of the window. Dabro has stressed that he is a licensed gun owner. He shoots as a sport. He says it took...
Maybe he shouldn't be. Maybe they should think about taking that license away from him. Just an idea.
Questions have been raised. He says it took place in an unpopulated area where he was unlikely to hit anyone or anything. And he's also said that he used training ammunition. I haven't been able to find out what kind of training ammunition exactly. There are many kinds, some of which can still cause serious injury, especially at close range. But yeah, we don't know what was being fired out of this gun exactly.
How did this video get out now? I mean, if he says it was filmed a few years ago, like, did one of his friends actually betray him?
Okay, so this is why this story is kind of juicy. That is exactly what happened.
Whoa.
Dabro is a member of a far-right party called Homeland Movement. They've been part of Croatia's governing coalition since May. And I think it's fair to say that they have helped to considerably drag the main party in the coalition, the centre-right HDZ, further to the right. It's notably been quite worrying for the Serb minority in Croatia, having this far-right party in government, because they only joined on the condition that the main party representing Serbs wouldn't be allowed any role in the government. Anyway, so Dabro is a member of this far-right party, but apparently he's also a very trusting far-right politician because he sent this video recently to a friend of his, another far-right politician called Mario Radic. And Radic seems to have apparently been with Dabro that night. So Dabro seems to have sent this video in the context of like, hey, remember this crazy night? What a fun time it was when I shot my gun at random out of the car window. However, Dabro maybe shouldn't have done that because he and Radic aren't actually political allies anymore. Radic quit the Homeland Movement late last year to launch his own hard-right nationalist party called Domino. They seem to have quite similar politics, the main difference being that Homeland Movement are in the government and Domino want to criticize it. And Dabro maybe should have taken that into account when sending this hilarious video to his friend. Or should I say, someone who he thought was his friend.
So it's hard right on hard right action then.
You know what? All is fair in far-right politics.
Has this former friend admitted to leaking the video to the press?
He has been very cagey about it. So Dabro himself told the Jutarnji List newspaper that he only sent the video to Radic. So there's no one else who could have leaked it. It's a bit like that thing with the footballers' wives. Do you remember this drama?
Of course I do.
It kind of reminds me of that, except the Croatian far-right politician version.
I'm not sure everyone else will because it's quite a British thing. Anyway, Google Wagatha Christie.
Google Wagatha Christie and I will drop a link in the show notes that explains the whole thing. Radic neither confirmed nor denied that he was the source of the leak. He told the newspaper that he had seen, several videos in the past of Dabro shooting guns during their friendship, which is now over. Was this video one of those videos? He couldn't possibly say. But what he could say is that this was frankly reprehensible behavior, shooting this gun out of the car. And he said that the public should be the judge of whether this behavior was, worthy of someone who is, after all, or was until very recently, a deputy prime minister.
I mean, let's be honest, this behavior really isn't worthy of a deputy prime minister, in my opinion.
No, it isn't. And I'm sorry if I sound gleeful about this story of a far-right politician stabbing another one in the back. Because, yeah, it was dangerous. Dabro said that the incident didn't take place in a built-up area, but it was just outside this tourist resort called Privlaka. And I don't know, if you shoot into the dark, how do you know that you're not going to hit anything? It just doesn't feel like responsible ministerial behavior. He was also Croatia's agriculture minister, by the way, along with being one of 7 deputy prime ministers. Now, only 6. Croatia is apparently very big into having deputy prime ministers. And even though Dabro was initially defensive about this incident and he tried to play it down and say that he didn't do anything dangerous, he did also say in the newspaper interview, of course, looking back at it today, it looks crazy, and I'm sorry I did it. It was a moment of happiness, excitement, and yes, recklessness. When the interview was published on Friday, Dabro was still saying that he didn't think he'd done anything resignation-worthy. But a day later, the Prime Minister, Andrej Plenković, announced that he had asked Dabro to resign, saying that his behavior had been unacceptable. And Dabro ended up nobly stepping down. He said he didn't want his personal situation to distract from the work of the government. It is worth noting that all of this comes at a time in Croatia where people are actually getting quite worried about violence. It's not a country where there is a lot of gun violence, and it certainly doesn't have anything like the culture of guns that you see in neighbouring Serbia. But gun ownership has been on the rise in recent years in Croatia, apparently linked to a general sense of people feeling unsafe. There was this terrible mass shooting at an elderly care home last summer where a gunman killed his mother and 5 other people. There was also a horrible knife attack at a school in Zagreb in December in which a 7-year-old girl was killed and several other people injured. So people are worrying about violence and talking about it. And it's not great in that context to have a deputy prime minister shooting a gun out of his window at nothing in particular, even if it was filmed several years ago.
Croatia's government doesn't seem to have been having a great time lately, does it?
It doesn't. And I do wonder if that's a part of why Radic, this backstabbing friend, decided to release this video now. He is, after all, anti-government, so maybe it felt like a opportune moment to kick the government when it's already down. This is the second time in just a few months that the Prime Minister has had to sack one of his ministers. In November, he also sacked the health minister, Vili Beroš, after he got arrested as part of a corruption investigation. And corruption allegations have dogged this administration. There was actually a vote of confidence in December over the fact that various ruling party politicians have been linked in recent years to corruption investigations. The government did manage to win that confidence vote and stay in power. But just a couple of weeks later, at the end of December, the HDZ, the main ruling party, they lost a presidential election pretty badly. Zoran Milanovic won a second term as president in an absolute landslide. He got about 3/4 of the vote. And Milanovic he's an interesting figure. He is a social democrat. He is from the political centre-left. And he's a really fierce critic of the right-wing prime minister. But he is also a populist, and he's increasingly won comparisons to a certain other populist president who may or may not have been mentioned already in this episode that European populist politicians often get compared to. Increasingly over the past few years, Milanovic has spent more and more time attacking the EU. He is also skeptical of aid to Ukraine and thinks that Croatia should protect itself from Russia by not backing Ukraine quite so strongly. Which, let's face it, that viewpoint resonates with a portion of Croatian voters. And so Milanovic has been able to keep his left-wing base while also winning a new right-wing base. Even though the job of president in Croatia is mostly ceremonial, Milanovic has a lot of personal influence and personality, and he is now pouring a lot of that renewed energy, fresh from his re-election, into attacking the government. So, yeah, this video of Dabro didn't come at a great time. And you know what? I'm going to just go ahead and give bad week to the whole Croatian government, not just to him. Because frankly, a video of a minister shooting a gun out of a car window, really, really not what they needed right now.
No, not a good look. Bad week, Croatian government. It's time to thank some wonderful people who have decided they value what we do here and are willing to voluntarily give us a bit of money to keep us going.
Yay!
Thank you to the following people who have signed up on Patreon. Marissa, Pauline, John, Eric, Joshua, and thank you to Jason for increasing. If you head to patreon.com/Europeans podcast, you can sign up pretty easily. And depending on how much you donate, you will be showered with our thanks. You could receive a postcard from one of us, or you could even receive a personalized voice message from Katie and me, which is kind of like a personalized few minutes of podcast made just for you or for your loved one if you want to do it as a birthday present.
It's like the podcast is talking to you. It's kind of creepy, but people like it.
They do. So please consider it if you've got any spare cash.
Another really nice reason to sign up this week is that we've actually just launched a new experiment on our Patreon page, which is the community chats feature. And so for the first time, listeners can use Patreon to talk to each other and to us. And it is a delight. They're sharing like really nice recommendations for films and TV shows and generally just saying hi to each other. It's a nice corner of the internet in a week where that feels quite rare. Go and check it out. It is at patreon.com/Europeans podcast.
And it means you don't have to go to Facebook.
Yay! It is a first for the Europeans. The first time we have ever had a drag cow on the podcast. Actually, you know what? I wish that was true. But in fact, Soya the drag cow is not our guest this week. Daniel Hellmann, the Swiss artist who performs as Soya the drag cow, he is our delightful guest.
Oh, sorry. Did I mislead our listeners at the beginning of the show, do you think?
Well, I think they're here now because you misled them. So we'll let it slide. We're glad that you stuck with us, everyone. And Dominic, even though you sadly weren't able to join us for this interview because you were singing, you were the first person to introduce me to Soya. How did you discover this marvelous drag cow?
Yeah, I'm so sad I missed the interview. There was a scheduling/technical problem. The world did things that meant that I couldn't be there, unfortunately. But I was so excited about it, so I'm glad you got to speak to him. I heard about Soya via my brother-in-law, who is part of a collective of trans filmmakers called the Transketeers, and they made a short film where Soya has this beautiful afternoon hanging out with an intersex bull.
It's really lovely. And one of the things you're about to hear in this interview, just to briefly explain what the hell a drag cow is, because it took me a minute to understand it. Soya is kind of like a drag queen, but a cow. It's probably best that you just go on the Instagram and check it out. Anyway, she advocates for plant-based diets with a combination of serious messaging about cruelty in the meat and dairy industry and also camp, fun, ridiculous music and videos. It is just a wonderful thing that exists. I spoke to Daniel, the visionary behind this marvelous creation, on Monday. And for reasons that are probably by now obvious, because we've made several references to it, I was pretty bummed out on Monday and not feeling great. And this interview made me feel so much better. It is so joyous and just exactly what I needed. So if you are also not feeling great this week, I hope this conversation can provide a little balm for your soul. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So we've got a lot to talk about, but I thought it might be good to start with a very basic question at the beginning. Why did you decide to become a drag cow?
Yes, it's a very good question. It was actually in 2017 and 18, I had received a scholarship from my hometown Zurich to spend 6 months in San Francisco as an art residency. And prior to that, I had made a music, dance, theater piece about meat and our relationship to death. In this process, I became a vegan. I realized how violent our food system is, including cheese. I thought cheese is just like a natural product. Cows, they eat grass, cheese comes out. But the more I learned about the industry, about the cows being made pregnant, the baby calves being killed every year, the environmental impact of this whole system, it it just became harder. And I had the need as an artist to speak about these things, but I also realized that nobody wants to listen to somebody speak about meat and dairy production, and people just want to be left alone having their burgers. And in San Francisco, I met a lot of incredible artists and activists. It was the first Trump presidency, and they were on fire and fighting against homophobia, transphobia, and other social justice questions. And I saw these performers on stage and was like, damn, I want to have the same courage, the same boldness, the same fire to speak about animal industries, animal rights, animal liberation. And thus, the idea popped up, like maybe instead of being a drag queen, I could be a drag cow. And this was like, I don't know, almost 7 years ago. It was almost a joke in the beginning. I thought like, okay, and now the cow, her name is Soya. She literally defines my life. She has brought me to so many nice places, so many crazy experiences. And I'm really grateful for having her as such a central part of my artistic practice.
Can you tell us about her character and her personality?
So Soya, she is a cow, but she is also a bit of a goddess. She can be a healer. She's also very silly. She has beautiful horns, and sometimes she has latex udders dangling between the legs. She's sassy. She's smart. She is also very caring. There is also something motherly about Soya, which I like, because for me, cows also, they have this calmness to them. My personality as a human is very bubbly. I'm more a chicken person than a cow person, I would say. But Soya gives me this kind of, she's like a grande dame. She's a diva. She's a bigger than life character. And in that way also, I think she gives me courage to do things where me as Daniel, I will be like, oof, that's terrifying. But when I'm as Soya with my high heels and my makeup, like drag makeup and long lashes and lipstick and extravagant clothes, I will climb on the McDonald's for a silly photo or something and scream at people in the streets. And it's very playful, and it's a wonderful project.
Last year, you went to Italy for an interspecies wedding. You married a bull called Ferruccio. Can you tell us about this wedding and why you decided to do it? And was it everything that you hoped it would be?
It was one of these experiences where, while I was like in this wedding dress, a cow in a white wedding gown on a hill outside of Rome with kitsch pop music playing, I was like, this is such a crazy fever dream. It's like a queer boy fantasy of being a Disney princess, but can you marry a cow? It's wild. And it has an interesting backstory as well, because this animal sanctuary is a place where they rescue animals from slaughter or from farms that exploit and ultimately kill the animals. The two people running this place, Massimo and Simone, the two human people, they are good friends of mine. And they invited me to perform there 1 year before. And when they announced that Soya the Cow is coming to the sanctuary, they had a big backlash of their online followers. People would be like, you should take care of animals, but don't follow this gender craziness. Why are you this wokeness shit? You're supposed to just take care of animals and shut up. And these two were like, they were very adamant. They're like, we stand for liberation for everybody. If we are for animal rights, we also stand for human rights. They are intrinsically linked. Humans are animals. So we need to take care of all these different struggles collectively. And they were really behind me, and I felt really supported. The year after, they were like, let's have you again. Let's see how we can shock these people even more. And they're like, maybe the best way to shock them is by making a performance, which is like in Italy, the Catholic country. Let's make a wedding. I arrived there. I stayed for 1 week. And each day of the week, I would go on 2 dates with cows who live there.
Different cows.
Yes, it was different cows because I wanted to know them. And I made a little interactive game with my followers. So like I was present, let's say, Carolina, who is a very slow cow, very calm. And I would ask him, what do you think? Can I date somebody who has a different energy level, or will I get bored? One of the cows, Casimiro, would like hit me with his horns. And it's like, I like him, but he's kind of dangerous. Like, do you think I should? It was very silly and funny. One cow, Lara, who is my hero, because she ran away pregnant from a dairy farm and came to the sanctuary by her own.
Wow.
She just literally came, walked up to me, sniffed me, and then walked past.
Oh, okay. She wasn't interested.
Shit, not at all. So you never should meet your heroes. But then there was the wedding day, and I had one specific cow in mind I wanted to marry, which was Lorenzino. He was a bit the punk rock star of the place. And he has this nice haircut. He would even let me sit on his back.
Wow.
It was crazy. But on the day of the wedding, he decided to run away to the mountains with some of the other cows. He literally disappeared.
So much drama in this place.
So much drama. But then when I walked down with Massimo, who has founded this animal sanctuary, we came to the place where the cows were gathered. And we had this fake Italian priest as a wedding ceremony master. I was standing there, and Ferruccio, he came from the back and just stood next to me. And it was like, he was telling me, like, why did you think you can choose who you want to marry? Like, that's another kind of human way of thinking. Like, you control, you create the narrative. It's me who is choosing you. And he came next to me. He played his part. Like, it was incredible. We exchanged vows. I said yes. And Ferruccio said moo. Then we exchanged our rings. We put it on our horns. And we had a vegan, cow-friendly cake that we eat together, and Ferruccio ate almost all the cake. He didn't leave me much. It was hilarious. It was
a very sharing attitude to his new spouse, but never mind.
It was just lovely. I mean, I was so surprised also by his curiosity. He loved it. Of course, it was a critique in a way also of like the traditional institution of marriage, but it was also a way to open it up and show like we can be in loving solidarity with other animals. Like we can celebrate respect, mutual responsibility, care with other creatures. And the family model, a nuclear family or also an extended family, it's not limited to our own species. We can be in solidarity with others. And that's what this wedding for me was about. Of course, I'm not sharing my daily life with Ferruccio now. He's doing his cow life. I do my human life. But the performative gesture of celebrating mutual respect with a being that is very different, but we can still like recognize each other. We can look into each other's eyes. I see he's someone, not something. And that was what this performance was about.
Ferruccio is not the only cow that you have made a bond with. You also traveled to Limburg a while back in the Netherlands to meet Pete, who is an intersex bull who was rescued from slaughter from the dairy industry. What was it like meeting Pete?
I did a theater show in the Netherlands. It's called Dear Human Animals, a solo show. And after the show, a woman came up to me, Leonie Kornips. She's a cow linguist, researching cow communication. And she came to me and said, everything you said in this show speaks from my heart. And she told me how she had rescued Pete while she was doing field research. And then it turned out that Pete was intersex. So Pete has 2/4 of an udder and a penis, which is placed in a bit too much in the front than usual. In a way, she told me, you both are queer cows, and I would love you to meet Pete. And then we built this project together with other people, also a scientist who works on care ethics and a collective of filmmakers. And we were meeting on a special day on a meadow in Limburg for this encounter between me and Pete. And I was kind of scared before also because I didn't know how Pete would react to the makeup and to the gloves and the whole costume thing. Would Pete recognize me, that I'm the same person in drag and out of drag? But then the encounter was so tender and so loving. And in a way, I realized also how superficial these preoccupations were. For somebody like Pete, my gender expression doesn't matter. It's not about makeup or if I'm wearing a dress or pants or high heels or no shoes at all. Pete connected to my energy and my smell maybe, and the way I approach him, the way I coexist next to him. And we had an incredible moment of sitting next to each other in the grass, leaning against each other. He was nibbling on my horns and my hair. And at some point, he literally put his heavy head. I mean, it's a big animal. It's like, 700 kilos or even more. He put his head on my head and he was so deeply relaxed. And I was relaxed. And we have so many prejudices about bulls, about them being aggressive, and oftentimes they're here just to reinforce our own macho ideas of masculinity. And Pete is so different. Pete had this gentleness about him, and The encounter is beautiful, and the film made by the Transketeers is very beautiful. It tells his story, but it also shows the images of our encounter. Yeah, it's going to premiere actually this week in a congress on care ethics from the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands.
I love that your work is all at once serious, has a very serious message about the dairy industry and the cruelty embedded in it, and is also funny and ridiculous. What do you see as the most important element of your work as Soya? Is it the fact that it is activism? Is it the fact that it is art? Or are you just hoping to have fun and connect with these beautiful animals?
I'm happy to hear this element of the humor, because I really think humor is necessary for us to survive. We live in such complex times. We have the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis. We have wars, right-wing extremism rising in many, many places. We have difficult conditions, economic pressures, and navigating all these pressures. I think humor is a tool to breathe, is a tool to not let the difficult things take away our joy. And for me, this is very, very central in my life. I want Soya's art and activism to be almost infectious. I want people to be like, wow, it's possible to be caring and empathic and still be alive and vibrant. We don't need to go into depression as an answer, because connecting with others and celebrating the possibility of connections and the possibility of running in a field and the possibility of being in the sunshine, all these things that many animals and humans do not have, especially in the food industries. They're locked up for their entire lives until they're slaughtered, and celebrating these moments is the key. And I feel a lot of activism is very serious, and I deeply respect all the people doing that kind of activism. I don't think there is one single instrument or tool. But for me, in order to be in my power, I need to be joyful. It was not easy to find that, I think, as an artist, to work on topics that are so heavy. I mean, I read a book about the fishing industries, and in the end, I just want to stay in bed for 5 days. But it doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve the fishers. It doesn't serve the people depending on the fishing for their livelihoods. We need to dream, to laugh, and that's kind of what I attempt to do with Soya.
I think the main thing I took away from that conversation with Daniel is that not all activism needs to be funny or should be funny. There are times where it absolutely cannot be funny. But I do think we should welcome it in these dark times and encourage more funny activism. Because otherwise, I mean, we're just going to drive ourselves nuts. Like, the human spirit cannot take endless misery all the time.
It's true. And there's a real problem amongst the activism community of lots of burnouts and people really struggling with their own mental health and having to stop. So, any way we can make it lighter, I'm totally behind. Yeah,
if there is a way to campaign about serious things that matter in a way that makes people laugh and lifts their spirits, why wouldn't we want more of that? Soya the Drag Cow has a joyous Instagram account, which you should absolutely follow. You will find a link in the show notes, along with Daniel's website about his wider work as an artist and performer, and the film that Daniel made about meeting Pete the Dutch Bull. Dominic and I have already seen it. It's really sweet, isn't it?
It's so sweet and touching. Yeah, and also has a serious message.
It is premiering this week in the Netherlands, but I very much hope it will be more widely available online soon. So you can keep an eye on Soya's Instagram account for updates. Have you had time to listen to or watch anything to recommend to us this week?
Well, I've still got a whole list of things that I watched over my lovely, relaxing break at Christmas. So, I thought I'd talk about a film that I really enjoyed called The Outrun. Have you heard about it?
I've heard about it in the last day because our producer Katz is obsessed with it.
Oh, really? I didn't know. I should talk to Katz about it. Well, it's a film based on the hit memoir of the same name by the Scottish journalist Amy Liptrot. And it stars the Irish actress Saoirse Ronan, who's amazing in it. I actually think she was maybe at one point tipped for an Oscar for this role, but it seems unlikely she's going to get nominated. But I think she has been nominated for a BAFTA. It's a film that's about a battle with alcoholism, but it's also so much more than that. It's a magnificent depiction of the life and environment of the Orkney Islands, this archipelago off the northernmost tip of Scotland. I had an amazing summer holiday on the west coast of Scotland last year, and now I just want to go straight back to Scotland and go to the Orkney Islands, because the film really is a love letter to these dramatic, isolated islands. So yeah, it's called The Outrun, and you might still find it showing in a few cinemas, depending on where you are. Otherwise, you should be able to stream it somewhere.
Saoirse Ronan and beautiful Scottish scenery. That is a combo that I am very much into.
What more could you want? What have you been enjoying, Katie?
I've got two things for you this week. First up, a spruce update.
Ooh.
If you heard last week's show, you'll have heard Wojciech and me talking about a controversy in Belgium over whether or not you should eat your Christmas tree, and how the Swedish health authorities had explained that while there is this long tradition of eating spruce in Scandinavia, you want to pick the young shoots in the springtime rather than eating the carcass of your commercially bought Christmas tree, which is quite likely covered in pesticides and chemicals. A couple of listeners wrote in from Denmark and Sweden to confirm this, that you want to eat the young spring shoots rather than old, nasty needles. If anything, just because the taste of these shoots is really sour and nice, you can just pick them straight from the tree, apparently, pop them in your mouth and have a good time.
But not now.
Not now. Wait till spring, proper spring.
So, in conclusion, sorry to come back to it, I did listen to last week's episode. It was bad advice.
It was quite bad advice, which has now been updated by Ghent City Council, and I think they're quite sorry. They meant well.
Silly Ghent City Council.
If you do want to cook with spruce, then listener Carl Louise's mum, she runs a small publisher in Copenhagen, and they published what looks like a very charming entire book of spruce recipes, complete with a guide to how to gather spruce. So if you speak Danish and you want to spruce up your cooking when spring finally arrives, see what I did there, you should check out the link to this very lovely looking book in the show notes.
I so nearly went out like halfway through listening to the podcast and just started clipping bits of the tree.
No!
But I'm glad I didn't.
I'm glad you listened to the whole thing before you did that.
Yeah.
My other recommendation for this week is also something that was passed on by a listener, Francesca in Italy, and that is European TikTok. TikTok briefly shut down in the United States over the weekend in a row over its Chinese ownership. It is now back, but during the 12 hours that it was down in the US, European TikTok users suddenly found that the algorithm started showing them a lot more video content made by other Europeans, and they seem to really like it. It was obviously a very good opportunity to poke some fun at our absent American friends.
What I like the most about Americans not being on here right now is that finally we're on the same page. Everyone knows today's date in the correct format.
But Francesca also said, I think that in half a day, we realized how US-centric TikTok is and how nice it is to find our same continent cousins.
I'm a little bit ashamed of myself that I was not thinking about this before the whole TikTok ban in the US, that there is really a community here of European content creators who want to be seen, who want to be taken serious of what they are doing, even though they may have certain kind of accent when they are speaking English in their videos. Because Europe is such a beautiful continent. We have so many amazing countries, so many beautiful cultures, so it never gets boring here.
A few different hashtags have popped up to help Europeans find each other. They are hashtag EUTalk and hashtag European TikTok. There's also BookTok Europe for finding European book recommendations. So if you are on that app, you can check out these hashtags and find some entertaining European TikTokers to follow.
Sounds lovely, but I'm still not doing it.
You do you.
Time for a happy ending. And actually, it's on a similar topic to what you've just been talking about in Inspiration Station, Katie.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because in the age of the tech oligarchy, it's quite rare to hear pieces of good news about tech organizations, and particularly good pieces of news about the organizational structure of a tech company. But this week, we got really happy news from the European-made social media service Mastodon, where it was announced that the German software developer Eugene Rochko, who founded the site, he's going to be handing over the reins of the company to a non-profit. Mastodon was always designed with a decentralized structure, but Rochko was up until now the single owner of the company. He says that was only the case so that he could ensure that the company wouldn't be sold. And now, following this announcement, over the next 6 months, Rochko will be handing over the responsibility to this new European-based non-profit. And it does sound like there are a lot of decisions that still need to be made about how best to do this and what kind of legal structures they will use and actually where they'll be based. But it's really a shining example of how a social media organization can be run without becoming a money-making mouthpiece for a despotic billionaire. It's not personally my social media site of choice. I went with Blue Sky, so I feel a bit hypocritical celebrating Mastodon here. But
yeah, I was going to say, I feel like I'm the only person on our team that hangs out on Mastodon. And I keep telling you all how nice it is there, and no one listens to me.
But at least I'm celebrating it here and giving it some nice positive publicity, right?
Yes, you're telling everyone else to go there, but you can't be bothered. I like this messaging.
I just don't want to spend any more time on social media, okay?
That's fair enough. So apparently you're disappearing again next week, Dominic.
Yeah, sorry.
Unbelievable.
I'm not having a weekend in 3 weeks, so it's sad.
It is sad. However, to cheer
You'll be
you
fine
up,
without me.
Yeah, exactly. Next week, I am delighted that I will be joined by my other favourite Amsterdam resident, our producer, Katz Laszlo, who didn't produce the show this week because she's busy working on our new series. But Wojciech Oleksiak and Morgan Childs did produce it, so a big thank you to them.
Come find us on all those lovely social media sites that I love spending time on, including Mastodon, Blue Sky. We're still on Instagram. Yeah, those places.
I made a very fancy Instagram reel this week. Did you see it?
You did. That was so cool. Well done, Katie.
I'm very proud of myself. Thank you. I am also very old, so it took me a really long time to make it. But you know what? Practice makes perfect. So maybe I'll make some more. Come hang out with us there. Or on the other places, which are a bit nicer.
Have a good week, everyone.
Do widzenia.
Bye.